I never thought I'd be the kind of person who notices how someone dries their hair. But there I was, sitting on a camping mat in our shared tent, water dripping from my soaked hair onto my shoulders, watching Cassian's hands move through the towel with more care than the situation required. We just sprinted back from the lake through an unexpected downpour, laughing like idiots the whole way, and now the air between us felt different, charged, like the storm outside had somehow gotten inside too. Let me back up. This camping trip wasn't supposed to mean anything. It was just the annual University Outdoor Club weekend retreat, something I'd been doing since freshman year. I'm Marcus, by the way. 23, graduating in 2 months with a degree in environmental science and absolutely no idea what comes next. I'd signed up for this trip the same way I'd signed up for the previous 3, expecting the usual mix of hiking, terrible camp food, and sitting around fires pretending to care about someone's acoustic guitar. What I didn't expect was Cassian. He joined the club last semester, transferred from some college in Oregon. I'd noticed him at meetings, of course. You couldn't not notice Cassian. He had this way of listening when people talked, really listening, like he was collecting their words and turning them over in his mind. Dark hair that always looked slightly wind-tossed even indoors, these sharp cheekbones that caught the light, and eyes that were somewhere between green and gray, depending on the weather. But noticing someone and actually knowing them are different things, and before this trip, we'd barely exchanged more than polite hellos. Then the tent assignments happened. Our trip coordinator, Julie, had this whole random pairing system she swore built community. I'd been hoping to room with Dev, my usual camping buddy, but he'd gotten paired with someone else. When Julie called out my name followed by Cassian's, something in my chest did this weird flutter thing that I immediately told myself was just surprise. The first day was fine, normal. We set up our tent together with the kind of polite efficiency of 2 strangers, trying not to be awkward. The tent was one of those 2-person backpacking setups, which meant our sleeping bags were going to be close enough that I could probably hear him breathe at night. I tried not to think about that. We did the group hike, ate burned hot dogs for lunch, and participated in Julie's trust exercises that everyone complained about but secretly enjoyed. It was that evening when things started to shift. We'd all gathered around the fire, and somehow Cassian ended up sitting next to me on the log. Not unusual, not significant, just the way people arrange themselves. But then he leaned over and said quietly, just for me, that he'd seen a fox earlier on the trail, and hadn't wanted to point it out to the group because he thought they'd scare it away, the way he said it, like he was sharing a secret. Like he thought I'd understand, wanting to keep something beautiful just for yourself. Made me look at him differently. We stayed up later than everyone else that night, feeding sticks into the dying fire and talking. Really talking. He told me about growing up in Portland, about how his parents were both artists and their house was always full of half-finished paintings and pottery projects. How he'd come out to them when he was 16 and they'd literally thrown him a coming-out party with rainbow cake, which sounds amazing but was actually mortifying because they'd invited all the neighbors. I laughed at that, and he smiled this smile that made his whole face change, softer and more open. I told him about my family, too. My mom, who's a high school principal, and my dad, who's a librarian. How I have 2 older sisters who are both terrifyingly successful, and how I've always felt like I'm still figuring out who I'm supposed to be. I didn't mention that I'm gay. It's not that I'm closeted exactly, more like I just don't lead with it. But sitting there with Cassian, I almost wanted to tell him. Almost. That night in the tent was the first time I really felt it. That awareness. We were both in our sleeping bags. The darkness complete except for the faint glow of moonlight through the tent fabric. I could hear him shifting, getting comfortable, and I found myself hyper-conscious of every sound. The rustle of his sleeping bag, his breathing evening out as he started to fall asleep. At some point, I realized my heart was beating faster than it should, and I had to actively tell myself to relax. It's just another person sleeping 3 feet away from you, Marcus. Completely normal, nothing to analyze. But I did analyze it. I lay there for probably an hour, staring at the tent ceiling, trying to figure out why I felt so alert, so aware. I'd shared tents with plenty of people before. I'd been camping with Dev dozens of times and never felt like this. Never felt like the air itself was humming with possibility. The next morning, Cassian was already awake when I opened my eyes. He was sitting up in his sleeping bag, hair adorably messed up, reading something on his phone. When he noticed I was awake, he smiled and said good morning in this soft, just-woke-up voice that did absolutely nothing to help my situation. We got dressed with the awkward tent choreography of trying not to invade each other's space, and I definitely didn't notice the way his shirt rode up when he stretched, revealing a strip of stomach. Definitely didn't. Day 2 brought more hiking. We ended up walking together naturally, falling into step like we'd been doing this for years. He pointed out plants, and I told him their names, which ones were edible, which ones the indigenous people of the area had used for medicine. He listened to all of it like it was the most interesting thing he'd ever heard. At one point, the trail narrowed and we had to go single file, and his hand brushed against my lower back as he gestured for me to go ahead. It was nothing, a completely innocent touch, but I felt it like electricity. That afternoon, Julie had organized optional activities. Some people went rock climbing, others stayed at camp to play cards. Cassian suggested we check out the lake that was about a mile from our campsite. Just the 2 of us. I said yes, maybe a little too quickly. The lake was perfect, hidden away in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, the water so clear you could see straight to the bottom. We sat on the shore for a while, throwing rocks and talking about nothing important. Music we liked, movies we'd seen, his favorite professor who apparently taught philosophy while wearing a different costume every class. My terrible experience with organic chemistry that nearly made me change majors. Then Cassian asked if I wanted to swim. I hadn't brought swim trunks, and I said so. He grinned and said neither had he, and before I could process what was happening, he was pulling off his shirt and wading into the water in his boxer briefs. He turned back to look at me, water already up to his waist, and called out that I wasn't going to make him swim alone, was I? I'm not sure I've ever made a decision faster in my life. I stripped down to my boxers, trying not to think about how vulnerable this felt, how exposed, and followed him in. The water was shockingly cold, and I gasped when it hit my chest. Cassian laughed, this bright, uninhibited sound that echoed across the lake. We swam out toward the middle, racing each other, splashing like kid. At some point, we both stopped swimming and just floated there, treading water, facing each other. His hair was slicked back, water droplets catching on his eyelashes. We were close enough that I could see the exact pattern of colors in his eyes, the way the green had gold flecks near the center. Neither of us said anything. We just looked at each other, and something passed between us. Something unspoken but unmistakable. My heart was pounding, and I knew it wasn't from the swimming. He moved slightly closer. The water rippled around us. I could feel the current from his legs kicking gently to keep him afloat. His gaze dropped to my mouth for just a second, then back up to my eyes. And I thought, this is it, this is the moment. But then thunder rumbled in the distance, and we both looked up to see dark clouds rolling in fast. We swam back to shore and grabbed our clothes, but we didn't have time to put them on before the sky opened up. The rain came down in sheets, soaking us even more than we already were, and we just started running, laughing and running through the forest in our underwear, carrying our bundled clothes, the rain so heavy we could barely see. It felt insane and perfect, and like something out of a movie. By the time we got back to our tent, we were completely drenched and breathless. We tumbled inside, zipping the door shut against the storm, and suddenly we were in this small space together, both of us in wet boxer briefs, rain drumming on the tent fabric, and I didn't know where to look. The air felt thick, heavy with everything unsaid. Cassian recovered first. He grabbed his towel and started drying off, then pulled on dry clothes with efficient movements. I did the same, trying to focus on the practical task of getting warm and dry. But my hair was dripping everywhere, and I couldn't find my other towel, and I was starting to shiver a little from the cold. That's when Cassian said, "Here, let me help." He took his towel and gestured for me to sit down. I hesitated for just a second, then sat on my sleeping bag. He knelt behind me and started drying my hair. I need you to understand something. He didn't just roughly rub the towel over my head the way you dry off a dog. He was careful, gentle. His fingers worked through my hair in sections, the towel absorbing the water, but his movements were slow, thorough, way more thorough than necessary. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck, could feel the warmth of him close behind me. His fingers would brush against my scalp, my temples, the sensitive skin behind my ears, and every touch sent shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with being cold. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the rain outside and my own breathing, which I was trying very hard to keep steady. Time seemed to stretch out. He had to be done by now. My hair couldn't possibly still be that wet. But he kept going, kept running his fingers through it, kept touching me with this tenderness that made my chest ache. I closed my eyes, let myself feel it, his hands in my hair, the care in every movement, the way he was taking his time like he didn't want this to end any more than I did. My heart was racing so fast I was sure he could hear it. I wondered if his heart was racing too. I wondered if he knew what he was doing to me. I wondered if he felt it too. This pull, this wanting. Finally, he slowed down, his hands stilled in my hair. I could feel him right there behind me, so close. The air between us felt electric, like right before lightning strikes. I knew I should say something, break the tension, but I couldn't make myself move. Then Cassian spoke, his voice low and a little rough. "Your hair's dry now." But he didn't move away. His hands were still resting lightly on my shoulders. I could feel the warmth of his palms through my shirt. I turned around slowly. We were face to face, kneeling on the tent floor, close enough that our knees were almost touching. His eyes were dark, pupils wide, and he was looking at me with this intensity that made it hard to breathe. I watched his throat move as he swallowed. "Marcus," he said, and the way he said my name, like it meant something, like it mattered, made me brave. I reached up and touched his face, just my fingertips against his cheek, testing, asking a question I didn't have words for. He leaned into the touch, his eyes closing briefly, and when they opened again, I saw my own feelings reflected back at me. Want, hope, fear, all of it. We moved toward each other at the same time. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like we were both afraid of breaking something precious. His lips were warm and gentle, and my whole body felt like it was lighting up from the inside. Then he made this small sound in the back of his throat, and the kiss deepened, became more certain. His hand came up to cup the back of my neck, fingers threading through my still damp hair, and I gripped his shoulders, needing to hold on to something solid because I felt like I was falling. We broke apart slowly, both breathing hard. He rested his forehead against mine, and I could feel him smiling. I was smiling too, this huge, stupid grin I couldn't control. "I've wanted to do that since yesterday," he whispered. "Since we were at the fire, and you were talking about soil composition like it was the most interesting thing in the world. You get this look when you talk about things you care about. It's beautiful." I laughed, kind of breathless and overwhelmed. "I've wanted to do that since this morning when you were reading in your sleeping bag and your hair was sticking up in 17 different directions." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his expression soft and open. "So, what do we do now?" I thought about it. We still had 2 more days of camping. We'd have to go back out there and be around everyone else, act normal when everything felt completely different now. And after the trip, we'd go back to campus and real life and all the complications that came with it. But none of that seemed important compared to this moment, this feeling. "Now," I said, "now we stay in this tent and wait out the rain and figure this out together." He kissed me again, slower this time, and I felt something settle into place inside me. Something that had been restless and searching, and finally found where it belonged. We did eventually leave the tent. The rain stopped, and we had to go join the others for dinner. We sat by the fire that night, not touching, but close enough that I was constantly aware of him beside me. Dev gave me a curious look at one point, like he knew something had shifted but couldn't quite figure out what. I just smiled and kept my secret a little longer. That night, back in our tent, we pushed our sleeping bags together. Cassian reached across the small space between us and took my hand, lacing our fingers together. We fell asleep like that, connected, and I'd never felt safer in my life. The rest of the camping trip was both easier and harder than before. Easier because now I could look at him and see that softness in his eyes, that private smile that was just for me. Harder because I wanted to touch him all the time and had to remember we weren't alone, that we were surrounded by 20 other people who didn't know yet what had changed between us. We stole moments when we could. A quick kiss behind the supply shed, holding hands on a trail when we'd fallen behind the group, whispered conversations in our tent after everyone else had gone to sleep. He told me about his ex-boyfriend from freshman year, how it had ended badly and made him cautious about getting close to people again. I told him I'd never really dated anyone seriously, that I'd had a few hookups, but nothing that felt real, nothing that felt like this. On the last morning, we packed up the tent together. I felt oddly sad about it, even though it was just a tent. But it had been our space, the place where everything had shifted and become real. Cassian must have felt the same way because when we'd rolled up the last of the gear, he pulled me close and kissed me, right there in the clearing with the morning sun filtering through the trees. "When we go back," he said against my lips, "I want to do this right. Take you on actual dates. Introduce you to my friends. Be your boyfriend if that's what you want." My boyfriend. The word sent a thrill through me. I want that. I definitely want that. The drive back to campus felt too short. We sat in the back of Julie's van, shoulders pressed together, and I found myself memorizing details. The way he hummed along to songs on the radio, how he'd absently play with my fingers when he thought no one was looking, the weight of his head on my shoulder when he dozed off for the last hour. When we got back and everyone was unloading gear and saying goodbye, Cassian caught my eye and mouthed, "My place tonight." I nodded, already counting down the hours. That evening, I showed up at his apartment with Thai food and nervous energy. But the second he opened the door and smiled at me, the nervousness faded. This was Cassian, the person who'd dried my hair with impossible gentleness, who'd kissed me in a tent while rain pounded overhead, who looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. We ate dinner on his couch and talked about everything and nothing. Then we moved to his bed, and it wasn't about anything more than wanting to be close. We lay facing each other, and he traced patterns on my arm while I played with his hair, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I think I'm falling for you," he said quietly. "Is that crazy? We've only known each other a week." I shook my head. "Not crazy. I'm falling for you, too." And I was. I am. It's been 3 months now since that camping trip, and what started in a tent during a rainstorm has grown into something real and solid and mine. We're those people now, the ones who hold hands, walking across campus and share coffee in the library and kiss goodbye between classes. Dev loves him, which matters more than I expected it to. My sisters have already demanded to meet him. My parents are cautiously supportive in that way parents are when they're trying really hard to be cool about something. But my favorite moments are still the quiet ones. When we're alone in his apartment or mine, and he'll reach over to brush hair out of my face, his touch as gentle as it was that day in the tent. When I catch him looking at me with that soft expression, that means he's thinking something sweet he's too shy to say out loud. When we're falling asleep and he pulls me close and whispers that he's glad the universe randomly assigned us as tent partners. I'm glad too. I'm glad for the rain that gave him an excuse to touch me. I'm glad he took longer than necessary. I'm glad I was brave enough to turn around and kiss him. I'm glad for all of it, every moment that led us here. Sometimes I think about that version of me who showed up to the camping trip expecting nothing more than a weekend in the woods, who had no idea that everything was about to change. I want to tell him not to worry, that the uncertainty he feels about the future is going to resolve itself in the most unexpected and perfect way. That love finds you when you're not looking for it, in a tent during a thunderstorm, in the careful way someone dries your hair. Cassian's asleep next to me right now as I think about all this. We're in his bed, and I'm supposed to be studying for finals, but instead I'm watching him breathe and feeling grateful. Grateful for random tent assignments and unexpected rain and the courage to lean into possibility. Grateful for him, for this, for us. He stirs a little, reaching for me even in sleep, and I set aside my laptop and curl into him. His arm comes around me automatically, and I close my eyes and let myself be held. Tomorrow we'll wake up and go to class and live our regular lives. But tonight, right now, I'm just here. Present in this moment. Happy in a way I didn't know I could be. And it all started with him drying my hair, taking longer than necessary, his hands gentle and sure, like he was trying to memorize the feeling of touching me. Like he already knew even then that this was the beginning of something that mattered. Something worth taking your time with. Something worth keeping. I knew it too. I think I knew it the moment his fingers first touched my scalp. The moment I felt how much care he was putting into such a simple act. Love announces itself in the smallest gestures sometimes, in the tenderness of hands in wet hair, in the way someone looks at you when they think you're not paying attention, in the decision to move closer instead of pulling away. This is my love story. It's not dramatic or tragic or complicated. It's just real. Two people who found each other by accident and chose each other on purpose. Two people learning what it means to be vulnerable and open and brave enough to say, "This matters to me. You matter to me." And it started in a tent during a rainstorm, with Cassian's hands in my hair and both of us pretending we didn't know exactly what was happening between us. But we knew. We both knew. And I'm so grateful we were brave enough to stop pretending.